Can nightmares kill you? In the 1970s, a 15-year-old boy who had fled Cambodia to come to America started having terrifying nightmares of something chasing him. So bad that he would stay awake for days. Then one night, his parents heard him cry out in the middle of the night and ran to go check on him. But he was dead. But then the same exact thing happened in the 80s to 130 other immigrant men. These deaths were referred to as nightmare deaths and even inspired the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. Some people hypothesized that maybe all of the men had something wrong with their hearts. Or maybe it was the stress of immigrating from a war-torn area. But the one thing they all had in common was that they all cried out in their sleep before it happened. The deaths eventually tapered off, but to this day, no one knows what caused them.
I ended my boyfriend's life when I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. I'm Shayna Hubers, and I started dating Ryan Poston. I was already known for my aggressive nature, but in our relationship, I became a very controlling, obsessive, and abusive girlfriend. This went on for a while. Ryan tried to end the relationship several times, but I refused. Until one day he got tired and broke off the relationship for good. I couldn't accept that. I lost my mind and didn't leave his house. The next morning before I left, I logged into his Facebook and found out something that made me go insane. He had arranged a date with another woman. I couldn't let that happen. If he wasn't mine, he wasn't going to be anybody's, so I confronted him and shot him 6 times in the face, ending his life. Afterwards, I called the police and told them that I had killed him in self-defense, but they found no evidence that this was so. I didn't regret what I had done. I even danced and sang during the interrogations. They found evidence against me and sentenced me to life imprisonment.
This is the Russian survival experiment. During the Cold War, Russian operatives wanted to see if their citizens could survive a nuclear fallout, but the one thing they couldn't account for was how radiation was going to affect local wildlife population. So in secret, they were testing radiation on animals and breeding these wild, hyper-violent creatures. Then they recruit a group of 12 adults and keep them in a bunker for 5 days, lying to them and saying that a bomb went off and all of their friends and family didn't make it. And then on day 5, they released them back into the woods along with all of the animals that they had been manipulating. This is actually one of the only photos ever collected from the trial, and it's believed that this is actually one of the animals they were working on in secret. The only thing we know is that one of these subjects was killed by one of these creatures almost immediately, which caused the other 11 to scatter in the woods and try and survive for the next few weeks. 11 skeletal remains were eventually found, all of them torn apart, and many of them missing their left hand. But a 12th skeleton was never found, leading many to believe that someone is still out there who knows exactly what went on.
The first woman in the world to have had a child with a corpse. My name is Jennifer Burrows, and at the age of 26, I was arrested because DNA tests proved that my baby was the result of an affair with a man whose autopsy I had to perform. I had unnatural relations with my patients who had died, and with one of them I had a child. According to the authorities, the man was a 57-year-old veterinarian who was driving in Texas when he was involved in a fatal accident that ended his life in March 2015. This man will never know of his son's existence, and my son will never know his father. I faced 158 charges for inappropriate interactions with 60 male cadavers, all between the ages of 17 and 71, in the 2 years prior to my arrest. The police began investigating these incidents in October, following information suggesting that I may have committed sexual abuse of cadavers. However, at the time I committed these immoral acts, there were no laws governing or prohibiting such practices, so I'm only accused of molesting lifeless corpses. But the saddest thing for me is that my child will never know his father.
I have just heard about what happened in Bosnia on Friday the 11th of August, so just last week, and it's absolutely shocking. This is Nerman, and he killed his ex-wife while live streaming the whole thing on Instagram, and apparently over 12,000 people watched the live stream. Nerman Sulemanovic has had previous encounters with the law, including assaulting a police officer and drugs trafficking. On Friday, Nerman began a live stream on Instagram with over 12,000 people watching. He said that they were about to see something that's never been seen live before, a murder. He then panned the camera around to his ex-wife, whose face was covered in blood with facial injuries. Shockingly, you could also hear their daughter crying in the background. He then shot her in the head and then panned the camera down to the floor where his child was laying in a pool of blood and said, "Someone come and save the child," before he left the house. He then went on a shooting spree, killing 2 other people, a father and son, and injuring 2 others, including a police officer. He then shot and killed himself. What's really shocked me about this story is that there were apparently people on his live stream posting supportive comments towards him, and the police have said that they could face charges.
This is what really happens after a nuclear bomb explodes. Up first, the first 1/1,000,000th of a second after a nuclear explosion, the heat is already so hot that a ball of plasma forms and reduces everything inside of it to subatomic particles. All this extreme heat then expands outward at the speed of light, completely scorching and evaporating anything and anybody that is unlucky enough to be within view. And all the people within 1.5 miles of the blast will receive third-degree burns, and these burns are so extreme and bad that you don't even feel them. The shockwave is a sphere of high-pressure air that expands outwards faster than the speed of sound, which is just insane. And when it hits the ground, it reflects back up to recombine with itself, forming what's called a max stem, shaving the city down to absolutely nothing. The shockwave will then leave behind a pressure vacuum, which sucks all the air back in with hurricane-force winds. The rushing air then feeds the flames and will then start causing fire tornadoes, which will grow to hundreds of feet tall, which is literally hell on earth. This absolutely disturbing reality is called a firestorm, and is exactly what happened to the city of Hiroshima during World War II. So we all better hope a nuclear bomb never gets dropped again, because if it does, it will literally be hell on earth. You should never eat the Chick-fil-A or Popeye's chicken sandwich again. Okay, so we all had the Popeyes and Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich in our lives. But have you ever wondered what goes into these sandwiches? Well, the video I'm about to show you shows the disturbing truth of what they actually put in these sandwiches to make everybody keep coming back for them. Just watch this and let me know what you think.
The Popeyes chicken sandwich. Come to find out, they have over 40 ingredients in the Popeyes chicken sandwich. 32 of them were man-made chemicals. And I said, well, let's see what Chick-fil-A has. Over 50 chemicals in the chicken sandwich. Over 40 of them were man-made chemicals. I said, so hell, this is a dope sandwich. So they really are flipping birds over there. Because there's no way in the world to justify. So whenever I seen that, I said it in a message, and someone took the clip of it and then went on the website of Chick-fil-A, had it broke down where they were clicking on it, showing all of the ingredients and these chemicals that were in it. Do you know the next day, Chick-fil-A took that down off their website? So now you can't find the ingredients to the Chick-fil-A sandwich or the Popeyes chicken sandwich, because they don't want you to know that they're drugging you, that they're doping you, that they have you wanting the food not for nutrition or value, but because you become addicted by the MSG and the other chemicals that they've inserted in that also are immune.
Abby Fisher was brutally murdered just 6 months after becoming a new mother after 3 rounds of IVF. Her murderer was her own husband and the father to her baby. Abby, a primary school teacher with a passion for science, was reported missing from her house in Castleford, West Yorkshire, on the 9th of July 2022 by her husband, Matthew Fisher. He then posted on Facebook saying, "Has anyone seen Abby? If you have, can you let me know or tell her to give me a ring?" He told police that Abby had been upset the night before at the prospect of returning to work, and that he'd woken up the next day to find her gone. In actual fact, he'd murdered Abby the night before and then left their daughter at home while he drove 12 miles to dump her body. Abby's partially clothed body was found the next day in a lay-by, and she was covered with bushes. She had soft tissue injuries to her head, chest and abdomen, and she'd been strangled to death. Gaffer tape found near her body had Matthew's fingerprints all over it. Police, of course, checked CCTV and they saw Matthew's car leaving Castleford around 4 a.m. and crossing over into South Yorkshire. It was then seen arriving back around 9:30 a.m., 50 minutes before he reported her missing, and his phone signal put him in the exact spot where Abby was found between 8:20 a.m. and 8:56 a.m. Matthew had sat with Abby's heartbroken parents while they hoped and prayed that she'd be found safe. He comforted them, knowing that she was already dead. Heartbreakingly, it was discovered that in the days leading up to her death, Abby had searched for things like Why does my husband hate me? And is marriage counselling available on the NHS? Eventually, Matthew did confess to killing Abby, saying that they'd had an argument and he'd beaten and strangled her to death after she threatened to move back in with her parents. On November 10th, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years.
This is the worst cartel execution video that nobody talks about explained. The video that I'm about to explain might be one of the hardest watches, and I don't recommend searching for it. The video is about 2.5 minutes long, and it's shot in the middle of the night. You see a naked man lying on the ground with his hands tied behind his back, and he also has a chain around his neck. The victim is surrounded by 2 cartel members, and the torture and the execution begins immediately. One of the cartel members is holding the victim's right leg to keep him still, and the other cartel member who is holding the knife takes the victim's left leg and begins cutting it at the knee. The victim screams in unimaginable pain, and in a matter of seconds, the victim's left leg at the knee is dismembered. And it's obvious the man doing the dismemberment has done this before. He then takes the severed leg and begins beating the victim with it. He hits him over and over again with his own leg until he moves on to the right leg, where he does the same exact process. He then cuts off the victim's right leg at the knee and begins beating him with it. And the victim during this whole process is completely conscious and aware of everything. The cartel members then take a moment to pose with the victim's severed limbs, and they then rest them on his torso. The cartel members then turn the victim over so he's lying on his stomach, and they then begin to dismember his arms. They start with his left arm at the shoulder, and at this point the victim begins screaming again, confirming that he is indeed still conscious. They then move on to the victim's right arm, and at this point the victim stops screaming and begins to groan, almost like he doesn't have the energy to scream anymore, and at this point the video concludes. This video is absolutely horrible, and many people tend to skip over and forget about this one. It's absolutely barbaric, and it's a sight you will never forget. Whatever you do, please stay curious and never go searching for this video because it will most likely mess you up. I will never get over the fact that stuff like this happens every single day on this planet.
When this girl vanished from school, it would take 9 years and another disappearance before the truth came out. Kara Kopetsky from Missouri was 17 when she vanished. It was the 4th of May 2007, and classmates had reportedly seen Kara leave school early. Now, a month prior to this, Kara had been struggling. She'd separated from her abusive boyfriend, 18-year-old Kyler Yost. The pair had had a volatile relationship, and a week prior to her disappearance, Kara actually filed a restraining order against him. This was in relation to a very disturbing incident when he had kidnapped her and refused to let her leave his car. Obviously, the investigators were very suspicious of her ex-boyfriend, but they just didn't have any concrete evidence to arrest him or charge him with a crime. It would be 9 years before there was any kind of update. In this time, Kyler had spent some time in prison for various charges, unsurprisingly including DV. He was also imprisoned for, and trigger warning here for animals, animal abuse. Now, as you may know, one strong predictor for somebody going on to become a serial killer is abusing animals in the first instance. Frustratingly, he was let out of prison though and went to a party on the 8th of September 2016. Guests at the party saw him leave with Jessica Runnions. When 21-year-old Jessica didn't return home, alarm bells started ringing. Now, the concerns were exacerbated at 2 a.m. the next morning when Jessica's car was disturbingly found burning by the side of the road. Now, Kyler was arrested again, but frustratingly, despite suspicions, there was no evidence to charge him for a crime. He was now highly suspected in the area for the disappearance of the 2 young girls. The following year, in April 2017, a mushroom hunter made a grim discovery. A body was found in Cass County, Missouri. Then another body nearby. Both girls had been discovered, but it would be a little while until they were officially identified. Strangely, Kyler tried to blame his deceased half-brother for the killings. His half-brother, Jessup Carter, had spent some time in jail and taken his own life back in 2018 prior to Kyler's trial. Despite him obviously trying to pin it on his family member, Kyler was found guilty of the killings of both girls. He was given life in prison plus 15 years.
The Titanic is haunted, and let me tell you why. So obviously you probably know the story of the Titanic. On April 15th, 1912, this massive ship sunk, and over 1,500 people died. But something interesting is that the Titanic ended up sinking so deep that the full ship has never been recovered. But over the years, a number of artifacts have been recovered from the old wreck and have been brought to the surface to be put in museums across the US and the world. And a number of employees from the Titanic museums that operate in the US have ghost stories. Yes, this is a museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee that has a number of artifacts from the Titanic, and they've even recreated some of the areas from the ship inside of the museum, like this, the Grand Staircase. A lot of these museums have ghost stories that come from them, employees that see figures, they hear voices, and they think that the spirits of the passengers who died aboard the Titanic are attached to their personal belongings and objects that were retrieved from the bottom of the ocean. I'm going to play you a clip right now from a video that I posted on YouTube where I asked an employee of one of these museums if they've ever had any paranormal encounters in the building, and what she told me was shocking. Here you go.
I have a question for you that I was supposed to ask you. You have had a paranormal experience here? Like what? Really? You've actually seen... Can you tell me more about it? Because I'm super into paranormal stuff.
Well, there is a very tall demonic-looking man in Interactive. There was a headless second-class passenger who saw me twice. In this room admitted that. There was a lady's voice who came over and said, "We're here," on the stairs when I was by myself inside. Somebody grabbed me on the bridge, and I saw a shadow on the promenade. There's a little girl who plays hide and seek in the children's gallery with a lot of us, not just me. And she also likes watching the movie in the movie gallery. Children's laughter downstairs. There's also been a little boy in suspenders and light coming down. He just likes looking at faces downstairs.
Really? So you think that comes from the artifacts?
I don't know where it was from, but nothing's really scary here except for that really tall guy in Interactive. That I don't think is a passenger.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is how a random discovery of an animal bone solved a murder case. Zoe Campos was just 18 years old when she vanished. It was the 17th of November 2013 in Lubbock, Texas. On the night in question, Zoe had gone out for some food with her sister Savannah. The pair ate and then went back to Zoe's flat and watched a film. Zoe then told her sister she would be spending a little bit of time with a friend called Carlos and then picking up her mum from work. Zoe sent a text to her mum at around 1:30 in the morning saying she was en route to pick her up, but she never showed. Worryingly, her family didn't hear any more from Zoe and they started to get very concerned. They heard absolutely nothing of Zoe for 3 days until they found a clue. Zoe's auntie spotted Zoe's car being driven and noticed it was being driven by a random man. She desperately tried to chase the vehicle to see who was in it, but it disappeared. Concerningly, not long after that sighting, Zoe's car was found abandoned. Police interviewed Zoe's sister Savannah to try and get any further information that could help with the investigation. Savannah told them that the man that she was due to meet was called Carlos Rodriguez. Now, Savannah wasn't actually familiar with him and neither were any of Zoe's friends. Police tracked him down and he claimed the pair had met that night to smoke some substances. However, according to him, when Zoe came round, he realised he didn't have any substances and Zoe just left to try and get some and never came back. This was obviously highly suspicious, but police didn't have any reason to actually charge him with a crime. Frustratingly, he was let go. Years later though, in 2017, Carlos was back on their radar. He got arrested for a disturbing unrelated stalking charge. Then in 2018, investigators got a tip. They were notified of a back garden in Lubbock near Carlos's old family home, and upon searching, they discovered a bone. Now, interestingly, the bone actually ended up being that of an animal. However, this was still very key to the progression of this case. Shortly after the bone being found, Carlos was questioned and he requested a lawyer. He reportedly then effectively kind of put his foot in it in this case, and he was heard on a prison phone call confessing that he had told an inmate what had happened to Zoe and somebody snitched on him. From this point, things started to really unravel for Carlos, and he eventually confessed to the killing. He said that after smoking substances, he had simply hallucinated and lost control. He confessed to strangling her to death and burying her in the back garden. Search teams were eventually able to locate her remains. At his trial, the jury deliberated for just 14 minutes before giving him life in prison. This is how a trip to Walmart to buy video games ended in murder. Erica Freeman and Christian Aguilar were 18 years old when they started dating in 2012. They met through their high school in Miami and were initially just friends. However, they both relocated to Gainesville for college and things between them turned more romantic. Erica's ex was Pedro Bravo, who also went to school with the pair in Miami. Interestingly, he was also one of Christian's good friends. Erica had initially broken up with Pedro during their senior year of high school. Erica felt that they'd just grown apart, but Pedro would not accept this. He begged her not to break up with him, and she buckled under the pressure and they continued as a couple. However, she did eventually get the courage to break up with him for good when she relocated to attend Santa Fe Community College. Pedro's friends recall him being really depressed because of this. Now, understandably concerned, Erica reached out to him just as a friend to try and support him. By this point, she had started seeing Christian. Erica and Christian decided to try and keep their relationship on the down low for a while so as not to rub it in Pedro's face. However, this proved to be very difficult when Pedro decided to move to the same college. Erica and Christian thought they were keeping their secret from him. Little did they know Pedro had actually found out. On the 20th of September 2012, Pedro messaged Christian. He asked if he wanted to meet him at a local Walmart, and he suggested that they go and buy some video games together. Now, Christian felt quite awkward about this, but he did eventually agree. CCTV captured the pair shopping as planned, but Christian failed to return home that night. Then, when he didn't even turn up to his classes the next day, the alarm was raised. Police interviewed Pedro as he was the last known person to meet up with Christian. Pedro claimed that he just dropped Christian off that evening without an issue. However, he would later change his story. He said that Christian had told him about him and Erica, and he'd punched him and driven off. Police then found some disturbing clues. Christian's bag was found at Pedro's place, and also Christian's blood was found in his car. A journal of Pedro's was also discovered, and this documented the fact that obviously Pedro really was not happy with Christian at all, and he knew about the situation with him and Erica. Pedro tried to cover his tracks once again and changed his story to say that Christian was bleeding after the fight that they'd had and Pedro had abandoned him on the side of the road. He claimed though at this point he was alive. Then there was some really damning evidence in the form of receipts. They showed that Pedro had bought duct tape and a shovel the night before Christian vanished. Tragically, Christian's body was discovered on October the 13th, 2012. He had been strangled. Pedro was eventually found guilty of the murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Infamous serial killer Son of Sam did not act alone. And by the end of this video, I think you'll agree with me. So, you probably know the Son of Sam story already. In the 1970s in New York City, a man nicknamed the .44 caliber killer, or the Son of Sam, terrorized the city. In total, 11 people were wounded and 6 people were murdered by gun violence. So at the end of the day, evidence led police to the front doorstep of David Berkowitz. And eventually he confessed to the killings and that was it. History knows him as the only Son of Sam killer. But I think that there were multiple satanic killers that aided in this murder spree, so let's look at some of the evidence. So first of all, this is one of the letters that the Son of Sam sent the newspaper in New York. In it, he says, "These are some names to help you: the Wicked King Wicker, the Duke of Death, the 22 Disciples of Hell, and John Wheaties." Now, obviously this also says Sam's creation, so let's dig into this a little bit. So this is Sam Carr. He lived really close to where Berkowitz lived, and David Berkowitz claimed that it was Sam's dog that instructed him to murder people. In some of the letters, David Berkowitz claims that Sam keeps him chained in the attic and says a lot of stuff about Sam himself. Now, what's interesting is that Sam Carr was actually known by people who lived in the area and police officers to be a very abusive man. He was known to have abused his sons. And now let's talk right here about John Wheaties. This is John, who people presume Son of Sam was talking about in that letter. John Wheat Carr. John Carr was Sam Carr's son. He lived in the same house, and he was allegedly a part of the satanic cult that David Berkowitz also belonged to. Now, one thing people always point out about the Son of Sam killings is that a lot of the sketches of the shooters just don't match up to David Berkowitz. But a lot of people point out that some of them eerily resemble John Carr himself. There's also Michael Carr, John's brother, who allegedly was also in the same satanic cult, and he bears an eerie resemblance to some of these sketches too. Now, there are a lot of strange details about John Carr's life and his possible involvement with this murder spree, but one of the strangest things I think about this entire case is how John Carr died right after Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, was arrested. So John Carr served in the Air Force in North Dakota, and right before David Berkowitz was arrested and found out to be the Son of Sam killer, he moved back to North Dakota. Now, what's interesting is that friends of John Carr who lived in North Dakota claimed later on that John had mentioned David Berkowitz's name a number of times before he was arrested. This is a proven link between the two, that he was very, very familiar with David Berkowitz. Other people who knew John Carr in North Dakota also claimed that he did satanic rituals in his house and outside of his house. Even the local sheriff in Minot, North Dakota claimed that John Carr had sacrificed German shepherds, just like the German shepherds that were sacrificed as a part of the Son of Sam murders. So in February of 1978, less than a year after Son of Sam was arrested, John Carr went to seek mental health help in North Dakota. And his counselor later went on the record and said that John Carr talked to them about his involvement with the occult and Satanism. At one point, John Carr told the people that he knew in North Dakota that he had something to go handle in New York City, and he never opened up about what it was that he had to go do in the city. And a short while later, John Carr was found dead in his home in Minot, North Dakota, less than a year after the Son of Sam murders ended. People believe that John Carr was the trigger man in a number of these shootings. And although his death was initially ruled an unaliving by himself, now it's been regarded as more of a murder, because of the way that he had been shot and killed. And it was also reported that there was a pentagram and other satanic things written in blood around John Carr's body when it was discovered by the police. Then there's Michael Carr, John Carr's brother. He also was reportedly a member of the Son of Sam cult, and it's also been reported that he was the trigger man in some of these killings. This is what people who research this case believe. And about a year and a half after David Berkowitz was arrested, Michael Carr died in a very suspicious car accident. He was driving really fast on the road in New York City, and he just smashed into something on the side of the road and died. Nobody else was injured in this car accident. He was basically just found dead on the side of the road inside of his vehicle. People obviously claim that he was ran off the road, he was forced to crash his car, and he was killed. But the more you dig into the Son of Sam conspiracy, the more you're going to be convinced that David Berkowitz did not kill all of his victims. This is literally only the very, very beginning of this. If you want to hear more about this, let me know. I'm very passionate about this topic, so I'll make a part 2 if you guys want.
Mysterious case absolutely does not sit right with me. Someone knows something and has not come forward. On the 12th of July 2015, 18-year-old Tiffany and her parents attended a graduation party in New Jersey. At around 9 p.m, one of Tiffany's friends spoke to her parents and claimed that they were really annoyed because Tiffany had used their debit card without permission. Tiffany initially denied this to her friend, but then did admit this to her mum Diane a little bit later. At this point, they were all outside Tiffany's house, and Diane went inside to find her husband. When she returned outside of the house, Tiffany had vanished. Now, they were able to see Tiffany on the deer cameras that they had outside the house. She appears to be walking down the driveway in her normal clothing and white headband. When they tried to find Tiffany, they actually made a terrifying discovery. Her phone was lying on the floor at the bottom of the driveway. Immediately, they knew something was wrong, as Tiffany never had her phone out of her sight. At 11:30 p.m, her family called the police. Little did they know, 27 minutes earlier, Tiffany had been hit by a train. Frustratingly, pretty much straight away, police presumed this death to be a self-unaliving. However, that just didn't seem to fit with the evidence presented. All of Tiffany's family and friends said how much of an upbeat person she was and that she was really happy at the time. She was making plans for the future, and the autopsy also showed that she had a clean toxicology report. Now, in the deer cam footage, she was fully clothed, but when she was found, she was just in her underwear with no shoes on. Upsettingly, 2 weeks after her death, Tiffany's mum actually found her missing trainers and headband more than a mile away from the tracks. Could someone have murdered Tiffany and then dumped her body on the train tracks to make it look like she did this herself? Tiffany's parents certainly think so. They definitely suspect some foul play was involved.